Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of our lecture. We're moving into policing, which is a macro system. It impacts the socialization of our children. What I'm going to ask of you as we move through this part of the lecture is to recognize that you have had a certain experience with certain agencies and policies, and that experience may not be a representation of all populations' experiences with those agencies and policies. So just being mindful of that as we move through. And really keeping the fact that we're learning about how these things impact children, and that's our focus. And so the importance of that as we learn about these things. This is all factual information. I want you to take it and critically think about it, synthesize it, and see if you can kind of figure out why it might be, or how it might impact children. The first thing we're going to look at is a job description from the Sacramento Police Department. This is a job description for a police officer. I want you to just first take in how many things they are required to do. This is a pretty lengthy job description. After you kind of wrap your mind around that, take a look at how much variance there is in skills required to be a police officer. I've highlighted some ones that I felt were pretty significant or different in variance on job requirements. The first one being conduct investigations, gather evidence, interview witnesses, take statements, make arrests, write citations, and or make written reports at crime or accident scenes. Some factual job skills, and also you can kind of read into that and understand that police officers are going into heightened situations with a lot of intense emotions, and there might need to be a need to make an arrest. And then you contrast that with attending, participating, and representing the department at a variety of community events, participating in community events. Those are very different skill sets, but they're both significantly important because attending and participating in community events really builds trust with the community and has them understanding that you are a trusted source. So it's an important thing to include in the job description, as well as attend community meetings to discuss crime problems. You can see how that would be valuable, so you are able to really represent the community that you're serving. The last one is evaluate and control violent situations and persons. Emphasize de-escalation tactics when appropriate. I wanted to just share that one with you because it really is two very different skill sets in one job description. De-escalation and taking control of a situation, they might walk hand in hand occasionally, but for the most part, if you're going to be taking control of something, it's not going to be the same skill set as de-escalating something. So it's really asking a lot of a person to have both skills, but also putting it in one job description. It might be kind of difficult to see which one to use. I'm not a police officer, but I do want you to be mindful that they're asked to do both, to decide when they need to take control versus when they need to de-escalate. All right, let's talk about the training required to become a police officer. I want you to be mindful that what I'm sharing with you right now is the minimum requirement. So a lot of places will require more than this. There might be a bachelor's needed. There might be additional training. Again, this is just the minimum. They need 664 hours minimum of training in a certified academy. They're also going to need to pass a background check, and this is also a psychological and physical background check. From there, if they pass those things and they complete their training, they can get an agency appointment. And on the agency appointment, they're going to have on-the-job training. It's going to be a probationary period, meaning that they don't necessarily always get to become a police officer unless they pass it, right? Once they do get through this process, then they become certified. And this is a simplified version of the requirements, but it is the minimum requirements. I want to share with you the items that they learn and the amount of hours that is spent in these certified academies at the minimum. Again, remember, this is just minimum requirements. I'm going to click on it so you can get a closer picture of it. And what we see is that there's a different amount of hours for topic, which would make sense. For example, we see that sex crimes gets about 4 hours. We can look down here and see that vehicle operations gets 40 hours. Use of force and de-escalation, again, this is something that they are required in the job description to do. It gets 16 hours. So that's a significant difference between vehicle operations and use of force and de-escalation. But just to give you an idea of all the topics they're going to be covering and the amount of time they spend in each area, again, at minimum, I wanted to share this list with you. Lots of different things, right? There's a huge list of things that they are going to have to learn in 664 hours. I don't think I mentioned this, but if you really to do the math on 664 hours, if they were going to training 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, it would work out to be about 16 weeks. So that's kind of the training required. All right, let's take a look at how much money California spends in this. California spends about $50 billion annually on law enforcement. That's roughly 3 times what is spent on higher education, community college, and college. And it's roughly equivalent to what California is spending on K-12 education. So it's a significant amount of money. We look at the arrests and how they break down. Misdemeanors are about 25% are drug offenses, 4.2 are petty theft. We do have some felony arrests, 38% are violent offenses, 9% are with weapons. When we think about how it's broken down population wise, women are arrested 1 out of 4 times, men 3 out of 4 times. And then if we look at the different ethnicities, we're going to notice some pretty big discrepancies. So blacks are arrested 5,596 times per 1,000 residents. Latinos are arrested 2,240 times, 2 times per 100,000 residents, and whites are arrested 1,823 times per 100,000 residents. And you can tell right from those numbers, there is a discrepancy because obviously blacks are getting arrested at a much higher rate than whites, even when we just look at per 100,000 residents. What's interesting though is if you come to the end of that sentence, you can see how much of the population each of those groups represent. Blacks are 5.8% of California's population. So if they're getting arrested at that much higher of a rate than whites, that is a significant discrepancy in arrests. Same thing with Latinos. They're slightly more, so it's not that uneven. But really, if you see the discrepancy between blacks and whites, it is a significant discrepancy. We also see in California that there are higher rates of arrests in rural counties than urban counties. So just something to be mindful of when we think about where children are growing up and how that's impacting their socialization. I want to share one more thing with you around policing, about interactions, who and why and how they're interacting. So when someone gets shot, 4 out of 10 times they have a diagnosed mental health condition. Blacks are also 3 times more likely to be shot and injured by the police. And then this chart you're looking at the bottom talks about how much policing happens in Black communities with Black residents. And so on the left side, what you see is violent crimes. So as it goes down, there's more violent crimes in those communities. The numbers on the top represent how many Black residents or the proportion of Black residents in those communities. And then if you look at the numbers within the chart, that's how many police officers or sheriff's deputies per 10,000 are in that population. Okay, so if we just take a look, for example, maybe at something over here that has very minimal or a lower ratio of population of Black residents to other residents. For example, we'll look at the very bottom. So right here, this says that there are 20.4 sheriff's officers or police officers per 10,000 in the population. We can also see that there are 100 plus more violent crimes in that area. So the policing's about 20 people. There's a significant amount of crime, right? Now what I'd like to look at is kind of go over here and we're going to find a similar number. We'll go right here. For example, 21.8. So slightly more policing happening in this community because it has 21.8 police officers and sheriff's deputies per 10,000 versus this one in the bottom corner that has 20.4 police officers and sheriff's deputies for 10,000. But what's the significant difference? There's 2 significant differences here. The first is that there's far less violent crime happening. There's only 40 to 6. Remember, this one has 100 plus incidences of violent crime. This one has 40 to 60. Why do they have more police officers and sheriff's deputies in that area? That would be the question to ask yourself. And we don't have all the information here, but what we do know is that there are more Black residents in this community. So we jump from 0 to 10 Black residents to 20 to 30% of Black residents. So there's a change in how much policing is being done that correlates, remember, it maybe isn't causation, but it correlates with how many Black residents live in that community. And again, I want to highlight that we don't have all the information of why that might be, but we do see that there is a correlation between how many Black residents there are in a community versus how much it's being policed, okay? This is not that different. For example, if we look at one more before I let you go, if we look at a community that has 30 to 40% Black residents, they have 19 police officers and sheriff deputies per 10,000 in the population, right? That is not that significantly different from a community that is 0 to 10% Black or has Black residents and has 20 sheriff deputies and police officers, but that community has 100 plus violent crimes. So again, not causation, right? We're not saying there's more police officers because there are more Black residents, but we are saying there's definitely a correlation happening between Black residents and communities being served by police officers. The ratio goes up. The more there are Black residents, the more there are police officers serving that community. And again, not causation, but it is something to be mindful of and to think about when we think about how we are socializing our children and how different children might be having different experiences for socialization. Okay? So, just some facts to be mindful of and thinking about all children having different experiences. All right, I'll see you back here in a little bit.